listening to the Travelogue podcast on travelogue.media.
Bem-vindo. Bienvenida.
Bienvenue.
Hello and welcome back to another season of the Travelogue podcast. This is going to be a great season and I think you're really going to enjoy what's ahead. Most of you are listening from the United States and the election is looming large, so I'm going to shift the tone of this podcast a bit, something more political. Hopefully I can manage this without adding more anxiety. Don't forget about the Beach Sounds episode. If you ever need to take 5 and tune out, you can just go to that episode and relax.
This morning I watched President Obama talking about Gitmo, right? Guantanamo Bay, which by the way, we are keeping open. And we're going to load it up with some bad dudes, believe me. We're going to load it up.
I want to bring your attention back to Cuba, in particular the blockade, El Bloqueo. It's not something either of the mainstream candidates are saying much about. Obama re-established diplomatic ties with Cuba in 2014, but what's happened since then? The embassies have reopened, some of the travel restrictions have been eased, cruise ships, commercial flights, and Cuba has been taken off the State Department list of state sponsors of terrorism. But El Bloqueo remains, and there's still as much Obama can do to lessen its impact. The International Committee for Peace, Justice, and Dignity published a list. Authorize the use of the dollar in international transactions with Cuba through U.S. banks. Enable Cuban entities to open corresponding accounts in U.S. banks. Authorize Cuban vessels and aircraft to transport passengers, cargo, and mail between the two countries.
Reverse the policy of astronomical fines levied against international banking institutions conducting transactions with Cuba. Authorize direct exports of U.S. products to Cuba and the importation of Cuban-produced goods into the U.S. Allow Cuba to import products, including U.S. components, from third countries.
Authorize U.S. companies to invest in Cuba. Close Guantanamo prison and return the naval base back to Cuba. End the preferential wet foot, dry foot policy that encourages Cubans to embark on illegal and unsafe migration, as well as other irregular migration situations. End the parole program for Cuban medical professionals that encourages Cuban doctors to abandon Cuban medical programs abroad for citizenship in the U.S. Stop funding USAID and National Endowment for Democracy programs aimed at fomenting dissent in Cuba, as well as the defunding of radio and TV marquee designed for the same purposes.
Okay, the next thing I'd like to do is correct a serious error I made. I have not mentioned before on this podcast Dara Monifa Cooper. Chances are you're listening to this from the United States, and if you're like me, you want to learn more about the rich culture of the Virgin Islands. So you definitely want to check out daramonifa.com and check out some of her work. Among many other things, she's one of the founding members of Dollar for Dollar Culture and History Tour, Inc. The tour commemorates a coal worker strike on St. Thomas on September 12, 1892. Queen Coziah led hundreds of workers, mostly women, to demand that they be paid in Danish currency instead of Mexican silver, which had become less valuable. The strike was a success. It avoided violence and led to an increase in pay for the workers. The 11th annual Dollar for Dollar Culture and History Tour will be held on Saturday, September 24th from 3 to 6 p.m. and meets at Market Square. I'll link to the Facebook page and the SoundCloud audio so you can get some more background. If you're here on St. Thomas on the 24th, it's your chance to participate and experience an important part of VI history. You definitely don't want to miss this. You just heard drummers at the July 3rd Emancipation Day celebration on St. Thomas. That does it for this edition of the Travelogue Podcast. Thanks for listening. Hasta la victoria siempre. Walk tall, live free. Thanks for listening to the Travelogue Podcast. Subscribe on iTunes, Android, Google Play, or your favorite podcast application. You can support this podcast by completing the audience survey, rating on iTunes, and by making a donation. Visit paypal.me/jskmedia. Your comments, likes, and shares on social media are always appreciated. Send email to podcast@travelogue.media.